We are lucky and fortunate to have as our first Lenten speaker, the Very Reverend Barkley Thompson. Barkley and I know each other prior to seminary days. Barkley was a year ahead of me in seminary and in the discernment process. But we both served in West Tennessee, Barkley at Holy Apostles, and I was at another parish. Barkley restarted Holy Apostles and it grew very quickly into a vibrant parish. And then he left for St. John's Roanoke, and from St. John's Roanoke became the Dean of Christ Church Cathedral in Houston, Texas. He is the 8th Dean and the 22nd Rector. Christ Church is in downtown Houston. It has a very wonderful and powerful ministry. And I've asked Barkley to share some of his thoughts about that. Barkley is a prolific writer. We'll include in his bio for you guys some of the stuff that he has written. The best decision he made was to marry Jill, his wife, and they have 2 young adult children. So Barkley, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. I'll add to what you said that at least for me, the first few years, it is really impossible for me to imagine the first few years of my ordained life apart from my friendship with you. Now, we were probably insufferable back then, maybe insufferable now, but I feel pretty sure we were insufferable back then, but we were insufferable together. And it sure felt like we were right about everything.
Right.
And all those older priests who just needed to get out of the way and let us do what we had learned how to do in seminary. So I appreciate that and honor it. And those years were very, very meaningful to me. And in both our cases, the bishop, our bishop at that time, gave us outsized responsibility for people right out of seminary. And it was great to have a colleague to lean on and share experiences with. And then I would say to your new congregation now, I know of St. John's Montgomery from a couple of visits. I have preached there and done a Lenten series there. And they're just, in case they don't know it yet, they're really, really fortunate to have you. Nay, blessed to have you. I just think it's a match that's going to be made in heaven. And I'm just glad that you're there for you and for them.
Thank you, Barkley. Yeah, we were a lot smarter back then. We were right out of seminary than we are now, weren't we?
Yeah, it's weird. You mentioned my young adult children. You know, one of my kids is a sophomore in college, and he's a genius. He just does everything. There's nothing he doesn't know.
That's right. Well, as I said, Christ Church is in the middle of downtown Houston. It has been there for 175 years. So it certainly has a rich history of witness and of proclaiming the good news. But I'm going to let you do a little bit more in explaining its setting, both as a downtown parish and its role in the larger community.
Sure. So Houston Christ Church is quite literally the oldest church in Houston. We're on our 182nd year now, and Houston was founded in 1837, and 2 years later, a group of laymen wrote to the Foreign and Domestic Missionary Society and said, "We've been begging you for a priest. We've now established ourselves as a church, and we're about to have lay presidency. We're going to have lay people celebrate the Eucharist once a quarter if you don't send us a priest." And apparently you could hear the wheels of the stagecoach peeling out from New York to send that first missionary priest. The good people of First Presbyterian Church here in Houston argue with us about who was the first church. One of the two started meeting first, and the other actually established first. And I can't remember which is which. Probably they started meeting first and we established first, being Episcopalians. We probably had the idea in our heads for a long time before we actually got around to doing it. But we predate the diocese. Christ Church is the second Episcopal church in Texas. And so we were a foreign mission of the Episcopal Church to the Republic of Texas, and go back that far. We're the only church in Houston of that vintage that's never left its original footprint. So Texas Avenue, if you've been to Houston, Texas Avenue is probably the main east-west thoroughfare that runs through downtown, straight to Minute Maid Park, where the Astros play. And that was the last border of the original plat for the city of Houston. That beyond there be dragons, right? In the old days. And that's the block we're on. So originally the church faced a different direction because it would have made no sense to face the open prairie. But we've been on this spot for going on 182 years now and never moved. There have been efforts to move. The last serious effort to move was right about a century ago in the late 19-teens, early 1920s. And the rector, who had been here 20 years, wanted to move to the edge of the suburbs. And after being voted down twice, he took about a third of the congregation and half the money and moved to what was then way out in the boonies. It's now Palmer Memorial Church, which is the church at the Texas Medical Center, which is in the middle of Houston. So it's funny how that works. But that was the last time. But the Christ Church has always maintained its dogged dedication to the urban core. And that's part of what attracted me. You probably recall that when I left Memphis, where I was, as you know, at a very suburban church and went to a downtown church in Roanoke, it was a sense of calling to be part of downtown ministry. And I'll tell you more about why I'm called to that later probably. But the cathedral has always been a destination church, not unlike St. John's Montgomery. I'm sure people drive in to go to the cathedral. I think that they do that. They've always done that for two reasons. I hope now there's a third. They do that, one, because it's historic and beautiful, and they like that connection. Yours and my ordaining bishop, Don Johnson in Memphis, used to be fond of saying that we consecrate space by its use. And so Christ Church, like St. John's Montgomery, has had so many generations who have been born, raised, married, and died there. And their prayers breathe through the walls, I think. And so some people want to be part of that. But I think the second reason that people historically want to be part of Christ Church is our commitment to the downtown. Over 100 years ago, the cathedral birthed DePelchin Children's Home, which is now its own nonprofit, which used to be an orphanage and now works with at-risk kids. 25 years ago, the cathedral birthed New Hope Housing, which is now in the city of Houston, the largest single occupancy housing, supportive housing for those who've lived on the streets in the city, with over 1,000 units. And now we run the Beacon, which is the largest day center for the homeless in the city. And so it's that commitment to context. Sometimes the homeless walk into our services, and when they worship with us, no one bats an eye. But really, it's the congregation is made up of people who come from outside of downtown to downtown, but with a commitment to the downtown community. And I would say more than anything else, there are three large Episcopal churches in Houston: St. John the Divine, St. Martin's, which is the largest Episcopal church anywhere, 9,000 members, and the cathedral. And I think in that sort of cluster, what defines the cathedral is our commitment to those who live on the margins, particularly downtown.
Wonderful. So since you've been there, have you developed a specific mission statement or vision statement or strategic goal toward that context to address that specific context?
Yes, we have. And I intended to have that on my other screen so that I could read you the mission statement, but it is in a paraphrase that is very close to accurate. Our mission statement is to proclaim the good news of God and Jesus Christ to the downtown, to the Christ Church Cathedral community, to the downtown, and to the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. Particularly in a pandemic, we take our role as cathedral very, very seriously. And so we have tried, in addition to everything I've just said about downtown, we've tried to be a resource for particularly parishes in the diocese that don't have the resources to live stream services or to offer lots of robust online programming. We have been churning that stuff out, not just for our own people, but to try to serve the diocese. So that's our mission statement, to proclaim the good news of God in Christ to the downtown and to the Episcopal Diocese of Texas.
Perfect. And what do you think are your greatest challenges in being a downtown parish? I know enough about Christ Church that there's certainly been ebbs and flows of of vibrancy and vitality and activity and membership. So what have you experienced as some of those challenges?
Well, you've named it to a large extent. There's this idea that as goes downtown Houston, goes Christ Church Cathedral. And there's certainly been periods of time where that were the case. The 1970s were a really, really difficult time for the cathedral. It dwindled in membership. The story is there was a period of time where there were more people singing in the choir than there were in the pews. The end of that story is then came Pittman McGehee, my predecessor 3 deans ago, that a lot of people in the Episcopal Church know. He has probably spoken at St. John's Montgomery at some point in time. Pittman came in the around 1980 and was the dean for a decade and was a rock star in the church. And the church grew like a gangly teenage boy. It grew faster than its infrastructure could keep up with. And so that really has been the case. We have benefited that for the first time in a long time, the cathedral is developing a geographic parish. One of the major, regardless of how downtown is doing socioeconomically or economically, as you know, downtown parishes in big urban settings don't have a parish.
Right.
And so people have to choose and want to drive in Houston, drive past literally 100 churches, including 6 or 8 Episcopal churches, to get to the cathedral. And that's an inherent challenge. It's a challenge both for growth and vitality, but it's really more a challenge for community. Those other draws that I already talked about, they get people here. I mentioned a third. The third draw is we've really worked hard, and I've been here 8 years, and we've worked really hard to become a community of welcome. I'm fond of distinguishing between friendly churches and welcoming churches. Friendly churches are churches that have lots of inward-looking circles. Like if you walk into coffee hour at a friendly church, you're going to see lots of closed circles, and the people in the circle are being super nice to each other, and they're glad to see each other, but the circles are all closed. A welcome community is one where the circles are broken open and people are looking at the door. I would it's weird for an Episcopalian to say, but as you know, I was raised a Southern rural Methodist, so maybe that's why. I am not worried about overwhelming newcomers. A lot of Episcopalians are worried about overwhelming newcomers. I don't think that's our problem. And so a welcoming congregation has its eyes peeled to the door and is looking for that person who walks in that they don't know, and is willing to go up and say, it's great to see you. Not as great to meet you, because invariably you've met that person before, but it's great to see you. I'm Barkley. Tell me about how you found the cathedral. So we've worked hard at that. And I think, I don't think I'm fooling myself. I think we are a community of welcome. And so people are driving in, not so much now, but before the pandemic. I think the real challenge is, how do you create community in a congregation? It is really hard to get, literally, again, in a unless you ask me about the pandemic, every answer I'm going to give you is in a non-pandemic world.
Perfect.
To try to drive into downtown Houston to get to an event at the cathedral midweek is not easy. Traffic-wise, it's not easy. Navigating the one-way streets of downtown Houston is not particularly easy. It's just really challenging. And so we have worked very diligently trying to, rather than just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to figure out what are the timeframes and what are the kinds of formational offerings that are worth the effort to get people into downtown Houston. Now, I will say something about the pandemic. I think the pandemic's changed all of that. I think the challenge will become in the next 6 months. The programming wise, the pandemic's been pretty good for us. I mean, we made the investment at the front end, which was already part of a capital campaign we were in, do the live streaming, to all of that stuff. And now, for instance, our Bible studies, I just as an example, I do a 7 a.m. Wednesday morning Bible study. When it was in person in downtown Houston, we averaged 15 guys, almost like clockwork. Since we've increased that by 50%. We average anywhere from 22 to 25 guys on Zoom, because they roll out of bed, get their cup of coffee, and turn on Zoom. Well, now the question is, what 6 months from now, what do we do about that? We don't have the human resources or the time to simply double everything we offer and have an online version and an in-person. And I don't know about you, but any hybrid in-person Zoom thing that I do is awful. It's hard to crack that nut. And so I think the big challenge post-pandemic is for all of us that are at large-ish downtown churches is going to be, just as we figured out how to live into a new virtual reality, what does shifting back look like? And I have not figured that out. If you know the answer to that, email me. Let me know.
That's why I'm talking to you guys. Y'all are smarter than me. Okay, so when you arrived 8 years ago, I started September 1st in the midst of a pandemic to an incredible, welcome and hospitable and gracious place. And so I have had a different experience in terms of transition, primarily because we were already kind of in the midst of living into this reality. It's not a transition that anybody trained for. And there's been some great benefits and graces to it and some big obstacles to overcome. But when you arrived 8 years ago, what was the biggest surprise? What was the thing that you found that you didn't know, and how did you navigate that in your first few months?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest surprise personally was the realization that following a capable and competent and beloved predecessor is harder than following a dumpster fire.
Well said.
So in both of my prior parishes,
let's be clear, Robert's not a dumpster fire. That's not.
No, exactly. That's the point, right? You're going to face the same thing. So the first parish I served, Holy Apostles, had gone through just a long period of time in the wilderness, and had some challenging priests in various and sundry forms over a long period of time. And then when I went to Roanoke, my predecessor there had served 3 years, and it was really remarkable how quickly he almost destroyed that place. I mean, it was in 36 months, the parish went from a vibrant parish to there being intrigue and a shadow vestry slate. And so my first set of meetings in Roanoke was a series of lay leaders who many came just to wish me well, but there were a small handful of lay leaders who came to say, just want you to know, I'm leaving. I'm not sticking around. I'm not going to leave your first week because I wouldn't want to do that to you, but my bags are packed and I've got the letter of transfer filled out. And the great thing about following a dumpster fire is you know what to do first. You put the fire out, right? And if you just put the fire out, you've really done good work, right? Here, I followed 3 deans in a row, about 26 or 27 years of really capable leadership. And so I realized there's no fire. I kept looking for the fire, and there wasn't a fire. And that is in itself an inherent challenge. What you realize at any parish is that rectors of lengthy tenure, they have an emphasis and a style, and something gets neglected. Something does. It's not active neglect, and the congregation may not even realize it's been neglected, because when the parish is otherwise healthy, people don't think to, not in a robust chorus, complain or even recognize what has atrophied. And so I started thinking about it in those terms. I spent about 6 or 8 months thinking about it in those terms. And what I realized was my immediate predecessor was super focused on outreach. He was here 12 years, and almost that entire tenure was spent buying up the city block across the street from us, building the beacon, launching the beacon, and then having a second capital campaign to pay down the much more expensive project the beacon turned out to be. And so for 12 years, the emphasis on formation here, spiritual formation, Christian education, was neglected. And again, not actively so. And I don't mean to say that there weren't things going on. There were. But what I recognized as I really listened was that people were starving for formation. And so at 9 months in, I arrived February 1st, 2013. And in, I guess about 7 months, September, October of that same year, we launched a visioning process. And what resulted from that was, it's also the case that the parish had not grown in 12 years. It hadn't really shrunk, but there was no emphasis on evangelism or welcome newcomer ministries. And so really what came out of the visioning process was a hunger for Christian education and formation and evangelism, although they never would have put that word on it. In essence, evangelism. But I wouldn't have been able to figure out, it wasn't glaring, right? But there weren't neon signs with arrows saying this is what needs to happen. Right. It was a much subtler and challenging discernment because I was blessed with capable, faithful, beloved predecessors going all the way back to Pittman. So really since 1980, the cathedral had, I don't want to say has had, because I don't want to grade the last 8 years, but until 2013, from 80 to 2013, really capable leadership.
So this isn't on the list of questions I said, but this is not, I'm not setting you up for failure here. What is your elevator pitch? If you are out in, you're out somewhere else in Houston and someone says, hey, tell me about the cathedral. What's your 60-second elevator? Why should they drive past all those churches? What is particular about the cathedral, a downtown Episcopal parish, that you tell them this is what you got to come see?
Yeah, so I some abbreviated version of those three things that draw people. I talk about our historicity and the legacy of the cathedral. I talk about our commitment to those who live on the margins, which really is, I've never seen anything like it. I take no credit for it, none, but I've never seen anything like it. It's what attracted me. I wanted to be part of a community with that kind of commitment. I talk about our welcome. I say that it is a place of welcome. And I now say it is a place where everyone is welcome. We had a street preacher this morning he's probably still out there out front with a microphone, just spewing Christian hate and doing everything he could to harass our people, our 60 people, because we're limited to 60 people per service, 60 people coming into church at 9 and coming into church at 11. And I said at both services, 11 o'clock on the live stream, I said, I wish that everyone on the live stream could have heard the preacher outside, because he is the perfect advertisement for the cathedral. Everything you heard him say, the opposite is true of the cathedral. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your walk of life. It doesn't matter who you love. None of that matters. If you want to know the God of goodness and grace at Christ Church Cathedral, come on in. And I will take credit for having shepherded the community to that spot. Yeah. We have moved as a community, really losing no one in the process. I'm sure that's not factually true, but we're a larger parish now, I guess is the way to say it, than we were 8 years ago. And as we have come to embrace all of God's children, and so that's part of my elevator speech too.
Related to that, as a downtown Episcopal church in a large, super large, second, third largest city in the country, fourth, but we're supposedly gonna overtake Chicago in the next 10 years, I think. So soon to be. So, do you see your growth? Do you see more growth in Episcopalians or in people who are seeking a different and new relationship with God, whatever their tradition might have been beforehand? So there's obviously some of that shuffling of the deck chairs, and we see people leave in the same way. Obviously, it's not like we're just receiving.
But there's always that. The two churches I mentioned, St. John the Divine, St. Martin's, Palmer, and some of the others, even some of the smaller Episcopal churches, St. Andrews in the Heights, some of the really great neighborhood churches in Houston. There's some of that shuffling of the deck chairs all the time, usually when a new rector arrives, right? People leave or come when a new rector arrives. And that's just part of it. Sometimes you comb your hair the wrong way and people don't like it, and or you whatever. But we have also seen growth in folks who are not Episcopalian, and I will say we had part of that visioning process in fall of 2013 was a doubling down on liturgy and worship. And you know me well enough to know I'm never going to be a bouncing ball praise band
right
guy. It's just not in me. It would be inauthentic. And again, one of the reasons I was attracted to Christ Church is it would be authentic for Christ Church. Lakewood Church is in Houston, and they do that stuff really well. Why would we compete with Joel Osteen, right? I'm willing to compete with him theologically. I'm not willing. I have no interest in competing with his worship style. So we developed a Celtic Eucharist that we call the Well on Sunday evenings. The liturgy we crafted using resources from the Iona community, the Prayer Book of the Church of Ireland, some other resources, the Northumbria community in England, Northern England. And then the music is all on cello, harp, and flute. Again, before the pandemic, that service averaged between 80 and 90 people on Sunday evenings. And the service that it replaced, which was a little chapel Eucharist at 5 o'clock on Sundays, used to average 20 people. So that's 60 people in worship attendance growth, 60 to 70. And that crowd is really interesting. They're people who are seeking not smorgasbord faith or buffet line Christianity,
right
but something deep and rooted. Right one, even song may not be their cup of tea, although it may become their cup of tea. But there's something about, and it's worth saying, there's a lot of Celtic spirituality that's not good and not rooted in tradition and not rooted in anything really. It's made up. And you got to be careful, obviously, but that's not what we're doing. This is stuff that is rooted in the St. Columba tradition and the Lindisfarne tradition, and I think that's what has attracted some of the new people who have come to worship at the cathedral. Is it's like when you and I were ordained, the emerging church was a big deal, right? And I remember a book came out, and some emerging church guru came out with a book, and the punchline of the book, like the denouement of the book, was that he put an altar on the stage. Like you moved the praise band to the back and put an altar on the stage. And he meant like he was reclaiming tradition. And I thought, well, good Lord, if that's what people are attracted to, the Episcopal Church ought to be growing by leaps and bounds.
Right.
So I think it's really about, sometimes when I talk to vestries, I will use the story when King Saul and his coterie are in the tent, terrified of Goliath. And David comes in to give his brother some cheese and bread or something and says, I'll fight Goliath, no problem. And so they put Saul's armor on David. And it's shiny, and I'm sure it would protect the wearer, and it's exactly the armor of a king, but David can't move in it because it doesn't fit him. It's not his armor. And to me, the wisdom of that story for a parish, especially a downtown parish, is you got to wear your armor, right? So it's not about figuring out what's the latest shtick that'll get people through the door. It's about how do you be you effectively and authentically. And our experience, I mean, now we're not growing exponentially, and who knows what will happen after the pandemic. I don't know if in-person church-going patterns will ever return to what they were. Somebody said to me in another parish here in town, before the pandemic, we were a geographic church with an online presence. This rector said he suspects that after the pandemic, we'll be an online church with a geographic presence.
Yeah.
That may well be true. So who knows? But at least up until now, I think the key has been to be faithful. You got to wear your own armor. And for us, that has not been picking up on the latest trend. It's been diving deep into what the Anglican tradition has to offer and being committed to doing it well and intentionally.
That's great. That's a really, really helpful answer. Okay, couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. How does the larger community of Houston view the cathedral? Do they view it as a resource? Do they view it as a spiritual anchor? Do they say, okay, let's see what they're doing at Christ Church, and we'll gauge what we do based on their response? What role do you play in the larger community? I guess both for Houston and certainly at the diocese, you're the cathedral, so that's a whole different set of expectations.
Yeah, so in some ways, St. John's Roanoke that I served had a larger footprint in the community than the cathedral does. Roanoke's a city of 120,000 people. St. John's is the large downtown parish. It is twice as big as the next sized Episcopal, maybe 3 times bigger than the next sized Episcopal parish. So St. John's that juxtaposition, St. John's has a really big footprint in the city of Roanoke. The greater Houston metro area is 6 million people, and the cathedral's a parish of 3,000. So, and Houston is not lacking in churches of any shape, form, or fashion. And
size and stature too.
That's right. That's right. So, in some ways, though, it's not so much our size or even the fact that we're the cathedral, although I think that probably has something to do with it. It is our historical role. So give you an example. The Houston Chronicle is going to be running an article next week on Lent and the way in which it seems like Lent never ended last year. And they called us. They probably called the Roman Catholic co-cathedral also, but we get that call a lot. I write op-eds. One of the things that I have written is a book that includes some of those op-eds. And the Chronicle the Chronicle has never not run an op-ed that I have either written and submitted or written with colleagues and submitted. And so I think that the cathedral is known because it's worth noting that Houston, unlike some of the true cities of the Old South, like Montgomery, Houston doesn't preserve anything. And so the cathedral is not only the oldest church in Houston, it's one of the only the cathedral building is our third building. It was built in 1893. I'm not sure there's another standing structure in the city that's that old. And so we have, our footprint is as much about the historical role that the cathedral has played. May Fete is our big first weekend in May festival. Used to be a community-wide festival. There's a 5th grade boy and a 5th grade girl who are named the king and queen of the May Fete. In the whatever year it would have been, Howard Hughes was the king of the May Fete at Christ Church Cathedral. So the cathedral has that kind of historic role, in the city, and I think that's a big part of it. And we lean into it big time. I want us to have that kind of role. I want us to be seen, and I think we are to some extent, as the center of theological conversation in the city. We have a wonderful relationship with Brazos Bookstore, which is the largest independent bookseller in the city, where if they have in a speaker on a speaking tour that is anything even touching upon theology or religion, and they need a venue, a big venue, the cathedral seats 700 people, they'll bring it to us. And so we've had some really impressive speakers come through, which draws the city in. John Meacham will come and speak on his book about politics and religion and better angels of our nature, and we fill the cathedral with people from the community. And then just real quickly in the diocese, I'm fortunate to serve with arguably the most effective diocesan bishop in the Episcopal Church. I mean, there are certainly others who could claim that, but I serve with a really good, really effective bishop. Doesn't mean that there are never wrinkles in that relationship. I think the nature of being the dean of a cathedral and having the bishop right across the street on our campus, of course, there are always wrinkles, or occasionally wrinkles, but by and large, we've got a great bishop, Andy Doyle, and he does allow the cathedral to be the cathedral. again, during this pandemic, there have been times when he has put out notices encouraging parishes with a solo priest to give their priest a week off and everyone instead tune into the cathedral live stream, for instance. We've produced a couple of studies, a book study, a Bible study on Acts, a vacation Bible school since the pandemic that we resourced out to the congregation, really beyond the diocese, but certainly intended to resource the diocese. So in that ways, it's the cathedral is important. We also allow any Episcopalian in the Diocese of Texas who wants to be married at the cathedral can do that. That's your right as a Diocese of Texas Episcopalian. It's your cathedral, and we speak in those terms. Occasionally, people will come downtown for whatever reason, and they'll come to church at the cathedral, and they'll sheepishly say to me in the line, I'm a member of Trinity, but I'm visiting the cathedral like I'm going to tell the rector or something. And I say, look, the cathedral belongs to you. This is the church you can visit on occasion and not feel like you're cheating. Because it's your cathedral. It actually does belong to you. We are both a parish church, and were a parish church for 100 years before we were the cathedral. And 110 years, actually, 1839 to 1949, we were just Christ Episcopal Church. And then in 49, we were named the cathedral. So we are a parish church with a parish community, but we're also the cathedral, and so it belongs to everybody.
So last question, and I will note, being the cathedral, I told Barkley before we started recording this, I'm looking at a ordination certificate where my father was ordained at Christ Church Cathedral and as a priest in July of 1954. And he is previously ordained as a deacon at Christ Church Cathedral. So I've got family ties to that place and appreciate its history. But that strikes me, that was just 4 years after it was actually named as a cathedral. So
yep.
Right before he went to seminary.
Yeah.
Pandemic, we have a pandemic, and you touched on this, so we don't know. Let's imagine that in May, we get to sit down with our staffs and say, okay, we know come September 1st, come post-Labor Day, we can go full out regular programming year, and we're going to look like a church is supposed to look before a pandemic. And let's imagine we get to do that. And we factor in which classes are online and which ones are in person, and we do all that. To what extent do you reorient or adjust any kind of strategic goals and priorities given what we've learned in the last year? Not necessarily the details of what class is virtual and what's not, but the big goals as a downtown parish. How do you reorient that? Yeah.
So that I am not someone who generally thinks that God manipulates the goings on in the world. But I will say, occasionally something happens that makes me reconsider. In the fall of 2019, 6 years after the first vision plan was adopted, we did visioning for our next vision plan. Sam Candler, our colleague, who is the dean of the cathedral in Atlanta, is fond of saying and taught me, every parish gets a new rector about every 7 years. Sometimes it's the same person, but it better be a new rector every 7 years, right? You have to vision, you have to you'll stagnate otherwise. And so we did that work in the fall of 2019 and into the winter. And about 3 weeks before the city of Houston shut down because of the pandemic, the vestry adopted our new vision plan. So we have this new vision plan on the books, what we hadn't done much with. And as the pandemic has gone on, we've recognized it's the right plan. It's the right plan for a pandemic world, and we think it's the right plan for a post-pandemic world. And it focuses on small groups. It focuses on a small cell group type formation, both with regard to head knowledge and heart knowledge, spiritual practice. That's a major emphasis of the vision plan. It served us really well in a pandemic. Who could have guessed? But the fact that we were already pivoting to that has helped. And I think whatever the new world will look like, that will be important. It also has an element that is focusing on, in a way that is a way that is bolder than we have been in the past. Issues of justice and being willing to recognize that, as Jeremiah 7 says, God says through the prophet in Jeremiah 7, you better not go into the church and sing your songs and say, we're in the house of the Lord, if the widow, orphan, and alien outside your door are suffering.
Right.
Doing about it. Worship is a derivative of justice and mercy, not the other way around. So it's got that. I think, if anything, our experience of the world these days demonstrates how important that is. And then finally, there's a section on the caring for God's good earth. Here we are in the oil and gas capital of the planet, not really of the world, but of the planet. And that's not going to change, at least not tomorrow. So we're asking the question, what does it mean? So here's the gray. We feed 300 homeless women and men every day, 5 days a week, largely on oil and gas reserves, or on the generosity of parishioners whose ability to give comes from their own oil and gas reserves. So we're not suddenly going to, there's that great picture from when the WTO was meeting in Seattle a few years ago, and a bunch of environmentalists were protesting, and they rowed out in their kayaks into Puget Sound to protest. And that's the picture that showed up like on the cover of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And somebody astutely pointed out that every one of those plastic kayaks was itself a petroleum product.
Right.
Right. We live in a gray world. It's not black and white when it comes to that. But we're asking the question, what does it mean to care for God's good earth, even in a place like Houston? And so I really think there was something providential of which we were blithely unaware when we were doing that visioning, those emphases will still be the right ones in a post-pandemic world. I don't know what it'll look like. I don't have any idea what it'll look like.
Right.
We always do. I'm fond of parish vision plans, not strategic plans. I think the gospel and the Holy Spirit are so inherently unbox-inable that a strategic plan like a nonprofit or a for-profit would have is too constricting for a church. A vision plan, however, amplifies rather than narrows. And so it is broad enough that I think in a post-pandemic world we'll be able to shift and shimmy. But I think the vision is still the right one.
Wonderful. That is great. Well, thank you.
If it's not, I may be sending you my resume.
I think you'll be all right. You'll be all right for now. You get rid of that oil and gas money, that's a different beast altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for this, and it's been good to catch up and good to hear your wisdom and your humor and your authenticity. I think that's I hope that people who watch this take that home, that you are who you are, and that makes a heck of a difference too in pastoral, prophetic, and just pragmatic ministry. And so I'm grateful for that. Grateful for your ministry there and our time together, our shared ministry. Anything you need to say before you take off?
No, just as I had mentioned to you before, we really do hope at the cathedral to lead a group to Montgomery in a post-pandemic world. I suspect it'll be into 2022 before we're able to do that, but look forward to seeing you and the church and experiencing that great southern city.
Well, we will do our best to not be friendly, but be welcoming by then.
That's great. Awesome.
So thank you for that. Take care, Barkley. We appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.